From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Back to meet some of the children's authors, which I love, because I was a child. We hope you're having a wonderful day today at the National Book Festival. The Washington Post has been a sponsor for the start, and of course the Library of Congress puts all this together. Washington Post, yeah. I have to let you know that this is being taped to be part of the Library of Congress's archives and also to be shown on the web, so just be mindful of that and don't sit on the camera thing over there. Our next author, illustrator, if Jerry Pinkney hasn't illustrated it, it probably isn't worth illustrating. Little Red Riding Hood, The Little Match Girl, The Ugly Duckling, Uncle Remus, Rikki Tikki Tavi, Aesop's Fables, Tales from Africa, Myths from Greece. I could go on and on. He, I think, is working his way through the entire canon of literature. A native of Philadelphia, Jerry has been illustrating children's books since 1964. He's done over 100 titles. I think the odds are better than even that an American born in the last 40 years has owned or read a Jerry Pinkney book. And not just an American. His books have been translated into 11 languages, published in 14 different countries. I want to throw some other numbers at you. He's been the recipient of 5 Caldecott Honor Medals, 5 Coretta Scott King Awards, 4 Coretta Scott King Honor Awards. Dr. Pinkney, in 2003, he received an honorary Doctor of Fine Arts from the Art Institute of Boston, created art for the U.S. Postal Services Black Heritage stamps, and has had more than 20 one-man retrospective shows at major U.S. venues. Somehow, he also found time to create the artwork for the 2005 National Book Festival poster. His most recent book for children is called The Lion and the Mouse, a wordless adaptation of one of Aesop's most beloved fables. Please give a big National Book Festival welcome to Jerry Pinkney.
Well, good afternoon. Now, could you consider this a National Book Festival anniversary? You would, wouldn't you? Once a year, that's an anniversary. Okay, then let's give a big hand for the National Book Festival 9th anniversary. Let's go. Now, it was talked about that my book this year, which I'm very excited about presenting to you, is an Aesop's fable. It's The Lion and the Mouse. Look, this is the cover. So that says it all right there, and this is the back cover. All right, so what I'm going to do is start at the end, yeah, and then I'm going to go all the way back, because how did this happen? You know, that's the question. How did it happen? So, okay, we'll start at my growing up years. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Germantown section, very, very small section, in a... Yeah, maybe you guys know Earlham Street. It was only a block long, and it was a dead-end street. And I mean, we did everything there. So I grew up in this small, really tiny house. There was 6 of us, plus mom and dad, everyone trying their best to actually express themselves in this little house. And I can't tell you how those walls had a hard time holding all that energy in. Well, it turned out that my mother and my father both encouraged us, all of us kids, to draw. So whatever, there was the simplest of tools. There was like a pencil, and you know what? They didn't even have markers then. So it had to be just pencils. And my father, he was a jack of all trades, and he was a painter, and he hung wallpaper. And at times when he had scraps left over of wallpaper, he would bring those scraps home. So we would turn the design towards the wall, and we would draw on the back. So I was always drawing, and I talked to people all the day. I said, it's incredible, because there were no artists in my family, no artists in the neighborhood. So how did my mother and father find the will and actually encourage us all to draw? Well, that's the romantic side. The other side is we didn't have a television. They were keeping us busy. Now, while they were keeping us busy, I found out that I liked the idea of putting marks on paper. And I drew everything in sight. So that was the beginning of it all. And then something else special happened. In elementary school, my teachers recognized that talent. And I began to become the class artist. And I did that through most of my elementary school years. And then I discovered something. I was lagging further and further behind some of my other students in reading and in spelling. That I was, at the end of the week, that I was putting a tremendous amount of energy into just keeping up. So this wasn't talked about at the time, but I'm dyslexic. And so that wasn't part of the discussion. However, I knew there was something that I could do that my other students couldn't do. When I sat down, I could visualize things. So I kept it all balanced. And I struggled in those areas, and I graduated with honors. And during that time, and doing all the hurdles that I had to climb, I was never a poor student. I was always a very good student. So that talent was nurtured not only through home, but with my teachers. Now, most of my books you guys know about, there's either something flying, or swimming, or running through my books. I'd like to share with you another story, and that was my love and passion for nature, for animal life. And when I grew up in this small house in the middle of this big city, which was a dead-end street with bricks homes and a concrete street, there were very few pets or animals around. But when my parents' relatives did well, they moved to the country. Now, it so happened that the country was New Jersey. But New Jersey was country there. And it was there on those weekends when we would pile in, we had this Ford Woody, and we would all pile into this car and drive to the country. I had an uncle that had a pony. And actually that pony appears in The Talking Eggs by Robert Sansucci. So it was at that point I discovered wildlife and was impressed by I guess the beauty of wildlife, things growing. I still love plants. And maybe the connection was also my mother who loved plants. So I cherished those weekends, and we did what other boys would do. We would build rafts, and we would explore the woods. I never forget the first raft we built. We chopped down wood. No one told us you don't make a raft out of green wood, right? Okay. So we had rope, and we would tie it together. And I remember all of us getting, stripping down and getting on this raft, and we had poles, and we all jumped on, and it sunk. It sunk, but that didn't matter. It was the adventure. And basically, I look for that in the books that I illustrate. Now, okay, how do we put this together, and how did Jerry Pinkney end up being an artist for books? Well, at the age of 11, I took my first job. I was selling newspapers at a very busy intersection in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I lived with buses and trolleys and people waiting for the bus or the trolley, or just talking, having casual conversations, and also in and out of the stores. So I would take a drawing pad and pencil to work with me. I got a job at this newspaper stand, and it paid $6 a week. $6 a week, I took this job. And at those days, what happened, when you made, whatever you made, you always put half into the pot, right? You took to mom. So I would give, at the end of the week, I would come home and give mother $3, and I would keep $3 for my spending money, which I would spend on Clark bars. Anyway, so I'm working at this newsstand, and it turns out that one of my customers, who bought a paper for me quite regularly, was John Liney. And John Liney was a professional artist. He was a cartoonist of a comic strip called Henry at the time. And one day he saw me selling newspapers, and maybe I put in between, I started to draw, and he took note. And he asked me would I share those drawings with him. Well, I did. And then he introduced himself as a professional artist. Then what he did was he invited me up to his studio. Now, as I said, there were no artists in the family, no artists in the neighborhood. I hadn't the slightest or the foggiest idea what a professional artist did. So one day, I remember walking up to his studio. In my mind, it was a clear day, unlike today. And the sun was streaming in his windows of his third floor studio. And I walked into this space. Now, John had a drawing board, big drawing board. And next to the drawing board, he had a tabaret. Wait a minute. What's a tabaret? Anybody know what a tabaret is? Well, a tabaret is like a short work table. That's where the artist keeps his materials. Well, remember I said I had a pad, I would take a pad and pencil to work with me? Well, Mr. Liney had pads of all different sizes and all different shapes, and pencils galore, and brushes, and he worked in inks, so he had all various, a whole array of inks and colors. And can you imagine what I must have felt like? I was 11 years old. I'm in an artist studio for the first time, and befriended by Mr. Liney, a professional artist. And I felt so excited about that whole experience. But you know, was the most powerful piece of that visit with Mr. Liney? Now, I don't know this for sure, but you could probably gather from this presentation what Mr. Liney gave me more than just this friendship in that studio. But that had to be the day that the seed of possibility was planted. It had to be the day that I made that connection of making pictures, the love and the passion for drawing, and also this newfound respect for nature and a way to express it. So those things were starting to come together for me. Now, one of the things that really also inspired me was the fact that when I grew up with the tales of Uncle Remus. I grew up with the Aesop's fables. These fables that were told to me earlier on, mostly because of the strong moral that these fables carried with them. And what I have to remember this, I have to think about is that what I remember though as a child growing up, I don't remember the morals as much as those amazing characters that would prance and leap and jump through those fables. And those things I remember. Interesting enough, as an adult, what do I remember? I know what I rely on is the moral, the strong moral to those fables. Now my studio, because I have a studio and also a drawing table with a tabaret, just like Mr. Liney. And my studio right now is in Croton on the Hudson, New York. And I'm in this sort of really beautiful setting. And where on one side of me is a large plot of land or a large area of green space, which is Audubon. And then I have a wildlife habitat on the other side. So I'm really surrounded by all those things that I loved growing up, and the space and the trees and all that I really fell in love with and cherished in my growing up years. So when I work with that as a background. Now, I talked about my new book, The Lion and the Mouse. Now, what was that? Okay, all right, that's another booth. Okay, so what, I guess the question is then, what inspired The Lion and the Mouse? Well, of course, I had just mentioned that the fact that indeed those fables were very, very important to me as I was growing up. The other side of it, when I thought about those animals, because in so many ways the fables, the animals, like the Uncle Remus tales, are really stand-in for people. And I thought about something else that I've always loved to do, and that was to personify my creatures. What's personification? Yes. Yeah, that's a good answer. It's personification is when you give human qualities, gestures. Sometimes I use clothing to give a sense of a human. So the animals become stand-in for humans. So in The Lion and the Mouse, I thought that would be kind of an interesting way to also use this thing that I love doing. The other thing was that of all those fables that I remember, there were two that really stood out. One was the tortoise and the hare. You guys know the tortoise and the hare? Yeah, that was one, and the other was the lion and the mouse. And how could we not be mesmerized and awestruck by the majestic lion, right? How can we not be that? And also, the mouse, and if I said there's a mouse, now I better not say that. We might empty this tent. But at the same time that we might run away from the mouse, we can look at history of children's literature and what character do we find central to so many stories? What character? The mouse, exactly. So those two central characters became sort of what I was also excited about. Now we know the story, right? Mouse leaves nest. Mouse accidentally climbs onto the back of a resting lion. Resting lion wakes up, discovers the mouse as a pest, but in some way, in the kindness of his heart, lets the mouse go free, right? Now, later, poachers or hunters, they lay a trap for the lion. Lion walks into the trap, snares the lion. The lion roars, and the mouse hears the roar. Well, the mouse hears a roar, goes to the lion's rescue, and with his sharp teeth, actually chews through the netting, releasing the lion. Pretty powerful story. So when I started, okay, what I would do was I would kind of sort of plot the story out in what may somewhat like a storyboard, doing little sketches, what they're called thumbnail sketches. What's a thumbnail sketch? Anybody know what a thumbnail sketch is? Yes. A thumbnail sketch is a very small drawing, like thumbnail, that's where it comes from. So a thumbnail sketch is a very small drawing. So I did a bunch of these thumbnail sketches. And then I did what you call a dummy book. What's a dummy book? Yes. A dummy book is like a model for the book. And the way an artist puts together a dummy book is you decide on the size, you know, and then you fold sheets of paper. And I actually sew this book together. And it feels like a book, but it doesn't have a cover, a hard cover, or it doesn't have anything in it. It's blank. And in that dummy book, what I do is I take those thumbnail sketches and I develop a step further. Now, once you have the dummy book together, then the artist has a sense of the rhythm of the book. And as that page turns, am I telling that story? So, what I discovered, because remember, I grew up on The Lion and the Mouse, and it would play over and over in my head as I was doing those sketches. And I looked at the sketches, and it felt to me like I had told the story without words. That visually, the story was told. And I didn't expect that. And I can't tell you how excited I was about that possibility, but would anybody get it? Would anybody get it? So I was eager to share it with some people. So I took it into my editor and the art director. These are the folks I work with, and it happened to be at Little Brown Publishing Company. And they responded the same way. They said, Jerry, you know what? It doesn't need to have text. So I was off and flying. That was great. So I get back in the studio, and it was, I don't know, evening. And I love to sometimes, when there's in the warm weather, is to open my studio window. And in this outside, I heard this whole chorus of sounds. And of course, in the evening, you know, there would be the birds, about to go to bed. There was the katydids and the tree frogs. And then sometimes late at night, I don't know what the sounds are. But they were always sounds, and they were sounds that I loved hearing. It gave me a sense that I was in some space where there were other things going on. And then it came to me, why not, just why not, add sounds to the book? So I wouldn't have any words, but I would have sounds. And these sounds would be like art. They wouldn't be set in a typeface or anything like that, but they would really be like a part of the art. Here, there's a hoot hoot of an owl, which means impending danger. And the mouse scurries and hears that. The next page, there is a screech of the owl. I'm sorry, you guys, but you're right. You guys can go out and buy this book. The store is still open. And there's a screech. So I started to say that, in a sense, the way sounds echo in my head and the way sounds plays out in my working day would be the same way I would use sounds in this book. It would give another sense of life and another sense of energy to it. And that's how it became this sort of wordless picture book. Now, they tell me that I could take some time and there could be questions that I might answer. If anyone has a question, just step to the microphone, and I'd love to hear, especially from you young guys, because that's very so important. Anybody, and you don't have to be afraid, because when you go back to school the next day, you automatically get an A. You know, I write to your teacher, and you automatically get an A. And if you want to send someone else because you're a little afraid, then that's fine too. If not, I will talk to you a little bit about certainly my history in children's books. As it was talked about, I've illustrated over 100. Over 100 stories, and my first book, I have a question. Yes?
Are you going to illustrate the rabbit and the
you
rabbit
know what,
and the
I'm
tortoise?
thinking, the question is, am I going to illustrate the tortoise and the hare? Now, I was going to write you a letter to get you an A. You're going to write a letter to my publisher. And because would you like that to happen? Okay, so that's what we would like to happen, but I'm working on it now. Wouldn't you think it'd be great, and on the cover there would be the hare or the rabbit, on the back cover it'd be the tortoise? I think that would be great. Thank you. Oh.
Why do you put yourself in your book?
Why do I put myself in the books? That's a good question. It's what she's talking about, that there are a couple of books where you find me. In the Ugly Duckling, I'm the fisherman, right? And in the Little Red Hen, I'm actually the miller. And by the way, the name of the miller is Mr. Miller, but I posed for it. I put myself into the books in the same way, interesting enough, that I put myself in the books when I'm making them. Because if I don't do that, that's what it's about. It's about me giving of myself and speaking to you or telling stories that were important to me. So in some way, I've already put myself, but that's right. I'm glad you noticed that. And I was almost going to carry that through, but I thought, no, in some of the other books, I wait, because I want you to be surprised when you turn the page and then you're looking at me. Okay. Yes, mister.
What's your favorite fable?
My favorite really is truly The Lion and the Mouse. There are a couple others that I really love. Anybody know The Crow and the Pitcher? That one is a real winner, and it's really high on the list, and I love that. And that may happen, it's less of a story than more of a moral than some of the other fables. So it'll come. Yes, miss.
Are there any Aesop's fables that you are thinking about putting into a sound book?
And into an Aesop fable I'm planning putting a plan to put in a book? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yes, and I hope so, and I'm working on that, because in a way, what I think that's quite rich about the fables is not only is it great storytelling, but it's also stories that were around, they're classics. It's stories that your mother, your grandmother can tell you, and you can tell your children. They're that important, and they're that rich. Yes? Oh,
I've noticed in your earlier works that it looks a certain way, the illustrations, and then it evolved, and your artwork has changed over the years, and now it's as gorgeous as it was before, but it's more flowy and more soft. So I was very interested in how it developed and changed and morphed and evolved, and your influences for that.
The question was about how my art has changed and grown over the years and how it got to be what it is today with the lion and the mouse. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I've been doing this. My first book was published in 1964. And guess what? It's still in print. So there's a process of when you are doing something that you love doing, because if you really love doing it, you want to have it grow. You want it to get better and better. And that's what my work has done. What you're looking at and hearing is a person who truly loves what he does. And in doing that, I work. Now, it's interesting enough, if I'm not traveling, I still go to sketch classes. Why? Because my drawing could grow. And it's morphed into the art, and hopefully 10 years from now, you'll ask me that question. I remember when you answered that question 10 years ago, and your art is much richer and much more fluid today. And that's what you hope for. Yes?
Are you thinking of putting any of your books into movies?
Am I planning on putting into my books in the movies? All right, you get a letter and an A, but you have to write Walt Disney. Okay. But I would love to have my books, especially animation. Now, I did do some things with Western Wood Studio, but it's limited animation. I would love that. In so many ways, what I do is like a movie. In other words, when I make many, many pictures, it is, in a sense, like a movie, except you turn the page. But I got two ideas. I'm going to do the tortoise and the hare and make a movie. Maybe I'll make a movie of the tortoise and the hare. Two birds and one stone. Told you I loved animals. Yes. Oh, here.
What's your favorite picture, and what book is it in?
Oh, I think my favorite picture is one of my favorite pictures. Has to be, and I'll share it with everybody. This one, where the mouse is somewhat asking to be freed. And look at the scale and the expressions on their faces. So we know something is going on. And that's a pretty important picture of mine. Thank you. Now, that was a question on this side. Yes?
Have you been in Africa?
Have I been in Africa? No, I haven't. It's interesting enough because, and that's a great question, and because that should be a visit, this particular book is set in the African Serengeti. So it actually takes place in Africa. And what the reason for it, because I have a large interest in Africa, and also Africa is so beautiful and so rich and yet so fragile. So that was important. Yes? It's coming.
Are you not reading your book?
I am writing a new book, or working on a new book. And guess, you guys know Three Little Kittens? Three Little Kittens that lost their mittens. I'm working on that now. Okay, and I'll let you know how it turns out. I may even make that a movie too.
How come you like animals so much?
Why do I like animals so much? That's a very interesting thing. I think when I was a kid growing up, I used to go to zoos, and I was fascinated with zoos, but at the same time, I was also fascinated about the lives of animals. Where do they live, and what was the true habitat? All those kinds of things. You look at an animal and you look at the textures, and you see the rhythm of their lives, and it's kind of wonderful and magical and also mysterious. You can love animals, but you don't totally know animals. And I think that's quite wonderful. There's a mystery there. One more?
What is your favorite book that you wrote?
My favorite book that I illustrated, I didn't write it, but a very good friend of mine, Julius Lester, wrote it, and it's the Legend of John Henry, and which was so important to me as a kid, growing up as an African American, I had very few books where an African American was the central character. Now, well, not only over time. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.